Just quickly today, this video is a field fabrication test using the all-new Bluetti AC200MAX instead of mains power as an alternative, right? This is a lithium-ion battery inverter kind of deal. And it's a segment cut out of yesterday's video, just a test. So if you watched yesterday's video, no need to go again, no recriminations from me, just this once. Basically, what I'm doing here is I'm simulating working with mains power using tools that require mains power, but doing it off the grid, just like perhaps working in some remote location or during a power failure. I've got this one simple fabrication job and I'm going to run all of the tools on the Bluetti here in the Fat Cave. If you want to know more about the device's specs and details, I'll stick a card up there now, dude. The AC200MAX is brand new, and in fact, it's launching today. The first 200 units are going to be $400 off using the links in the description. And once those first 200 AC200MAXs go, it's going to be back to the full recommended retail price. That promotion is going to start at 11 a.m. today, Tuesday the 12th, Sydney time. That's basically right now relative to the upload timing for this report. I decided to cut just the test and post it as a separate report in response to a comment from a viewer named Alex McLennan, who put forward a usage case for his AC200P, which is the predecessor, which I had not considered, which is you can't fly anywhere basically with a petrol generator in your carry-on to work at some remote work site in the boonies. So what we're going to do now is we're going to hear from Alex and then we're going to roll the field test. I purchased an AC200P to replace a 2 kVA genset to operate a 1500 watt demolition jackhammer, mostly used for driving earth rods into some terrible ground in remote locations in northern Australia. The AC200P can even allow me to do this in places with aircraft only access. A genset is not an option here, so a sledgehammer was the weapon of choice. AC200P does a great job and should give an hour and 20 minutes of operation if I need to drive home 50 earth rods in one sitting. I started with a full AC200MAX, right, with a battery at 100%, and first thing, I charged up a 4 amp hour power tool battery because I'll be needing that later. Right? All the machining operations you see here are going to be done on Bluetti portable power alone. The lights and the fan in the Fat Cave are running on the mains, however, just so we know what's driving what. Today's objective, I'm making a plate for mounting the world's cheapest cast iron swivel vise on the bench along the side wall. Pretty straightforward stuff, okay, but without mains power. So I marked out the plate and I centre popped the 14 holes. And then I rounded over the corners because elegance is my middle name, obviously. I did the bulk of the corner waste. I handled that with Satan's shears first, just to extend the life of the abrasives, right? It's not a bad idea to do bulk removal before you start with the abrasives. And yeah, before you say it, I do need a more rigid bench for the shears. Dude, Fat Caves are inevitably a work in progress, right? They always are. I finished the corners off using the sanding disc linishing attachment on my main 200mm bench grinder. The Bluetti drove that no problem. And I deburred the outside with a file and an old sanding disc, and I think it's always good not to lose sight of the fact that sometimes elbow grease is actually the most efficient option. And then I cranked up the drill press, like the big one. It's a 2.4 horsepower, which is 1.5 kilowatt single phase machine, 240 volts at 8 amps nominally. I didn't know how the AC200MAX would cope with the startup load on that machine because it does have 3 pulleys and 2 belts to get from the motor to the quill, but it was fine, like seamless. So I decided to drill the 4 holes that I was going to tap for M12 by 1.75 first. They're the ones I'm going to use to hold the vise to the plate using M12 socket head cap screws. And I expertly drilled the wrong friggin' hole straight out of the gate. You fuckwit. Yes, like a rank amateur in front of witnesses, including you. Of friggin' course. So my official story henceforth is, this is an excellent opportunity to add drama to this fine production and see if the AC200MAX is going to drive a welder. Frankly, I wasn't that hopeful because the welder here is a Lincoln Electric 180C power MIG with a 15 amp plug, which implies that it has the capacity to draw more than 2.4 kVA potentially. So I used a slow wire speed and I kind of snuck the volts up as high as I could. And I did trip the AC200MAX a few times during this process, but that's easy to clear and it just boots up again. And I just dropped the volts back to the point where it had run a bead more or less okay. And I went with short runs to fill the hole. The bar under the plate is a piece of aluminium stock, just an offcut, right? It stops the weld metal from falling straight through like a big drip. It helps it freeze fast because aluminium is an excellent conductor, like a heat sink, and it stops me from welding the frigging plate to the table, which is kind of a neat trick. If you are ever as dumb as me and make a mistake like that, make the story even better by showing you how you can actually weld with the AC200MAX, if you are ever as dumb as me, remember the aluminium trick for filling up holes because it's awesome. That welder was driving 035 flux cord wire, which is 0.9 of a millimetre, and I suspect that if I dropped the setup back to 030 diameter wire, which is 0.8 millimetres, it would have made the AC200MAX a whole lot happier driving it, right? But I just couldn't be arsed doing that for one hole, right? And ultimately, it got the job done. I wouldn't be planning on welding up a trailer using the Bluetti, but if you run a rally car or something and you're out in the boonies and you need to do a bit of light fabrication work, bit of panel repair or something on location, then yeah, dude, that is definitely doable. And then I just used a flap disc on a 125mm angle grinder to smooth things over there, and the Bluetti ran that just fine. And despite losing half an hour of my life that I will never get back because I was multitasking and not really paying attention to the core business, I got back to drilling. This time with the holes in the right place, amazingly enough. All up, there are 10 clearance holes in the plate. They're 7mm each. That's for the mounting screws which hold the plate to the bench, and 4 holes for the vise which are drilled at 10.2mm, which is the tapping size for M12 by 1.75. The easiest way to mark out those 4 holes is to use the vise itself as a template and grab yourself a trusty transfer punch set. There's no measuring, plus it ensures that those holes will be concentric, as opposed to just winging it with a felt tip marker, which is always preposterously dodgy. If you want to do the drilling and tapping thing, a 10.2mm drill is a fairly esoteric thing, really. At least it is in the context of Bunnings. So go over to Ames Industrial. I'll put a link for the drill and the tap in the description. You'll be tapping like a 15-year-old before you know it. Okay, 8mm of plate thickness. Well, that's going to give me more than 4 threads of engagement for each one of those cap screws, and I'll be using 4 high tensile M12 socket head cap screws to hold the vise to the plate, which is just going to look a bit neater than conventional hex head set screws, which you might think of as bolts notionally. So I deburred all of the holes using a handheld drill and a countersink bit powered by the battery, which the Bluetti just charged up, and then I switched to a mag drill to countersink the 10 mounting holes. And I could have obviously done that on the drill press, but the mag drill is fun to use and also a pretty good test for the Bluetti, seeing as it has to drive the magnet, which delivers about 1.2 to 1.3 tonnes of clamping force when it's energised, as well as providing the power to remove the metal via the bit. These things use a Welding shank inside the quill, which delivers incredibly positive drive. And it does that by locating the bit using 2 set screws and a flat, and they clamp onto the shank of the bit and they make it basically immovable, right? They can also drive these neat things called annular cutters, which are essentially precision ground hole saws designed to make really big holes in thick steel fast. Mag drills are flat out awesome, and it's great to know that you can drive one remotely out in the boonies using the AC200MAX. And then I just had to tap the 4 holes for the set screws, and that was all down to that Latin dude, Manuel Labor, for that one. I'm not set up for power tapping, sadly. The tapping jig you can see in these shots is a great way to ensure that the tap goes in reasonably square to the face. It's a magnetic base too, and a tap wrench and a guide block all in one. And all that was left then was to mount the plate to the bench with a hex driver using the battery charged up earlier and screw down the vise with a 10mm Allen wrench. Overall, I'm really happy with how that turned out. There's a slight boost to Fat Cave functionality, which is essentially what one should aspire to every time one sets foot in one's own Fat Cave, in my view, at the risk of sounding like friggin' Yoda. In case you were wondering, the reason for using the plate is it's dead easy to drill and tap for other benchtop devices, even ones that you do not yet own, because you can do it retrospectively, especially if you've got a mag drill, right? If your Fat Cave space is limited, you can run a vise and a bench grinder and a bar bender and whatever else you want off just the one plate. And you just need one Allen wrench to swap out all of those different components. At the end of all of this, grinding the 4 corners, drilling the 15 holes, including my brilliantly contrived mistake, which I really just did to cleverly demonstrate some Bluetti-enabled off-grid welding, obviously. Plus the angle grinder, cutting those 14 countersinks with the mag drill and charging up the power tool battery, the Bluetti AC200MAX still had 73% of its total charge remaining. I'd only used about a quarter of its capacity, in other words. So you could make another 3 of those plates, which is kind of a day's work, before fading to black. I think it's fair to say, however, that you would probably be exhausted before it would be, at least in many Fat Cave fabrication scenarios. My impression of this is the AC200MAX is a keeper, dude. It's versatile and very grunty. I'm yet to try out the solar panels because the weather, frankly, has not been kind in that regard lately. But perhaps things will look up and we can all get back to worrying about melanoma directly. Dude, don't forget the $400 off, right? 11 a.m. tomorrow, April the 12th. Link in the description. Thank you very much for watching.